one video. I apologize to all who thought they would see my face, but this is the way it's going to be, one more time at least. We're going to talk about World War One, and much of what we need to talk about has nothing to do with the actual war. Just kind of World War Two mostly focuses on our economy, our ability to mobilize, and our relations at home, and what the government did. The actual war part, not as important, and you should all remember the main causes to World War One: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism, and those things set off by the powder keg of the Balkans and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets Germany into a two-front war. When the Schlieffen Plan doesn't work, this war will go on and on and on. We'll get trench warfare in the West, all quiet in the Western Front. If you need to watch that movie over again, would give you a great example. Or just go see 1917, which I still need to see. Okay, so we're going to start with the actual war and United States neutrality. The United States was in no position to start fighting for a couple of reasons. One, that Woodrow Wilson ran for re-election on the platform that he kept us out of the war in 1916. Ironically, in 1917, he'll bring us into the war. However, with that, couple things. We were staying out for trade. We wanted to trade with both countries or all countries involved. It was good business. Remember, war is good business. And two, we are a nation of a lot of immigrants. For those who were supporting the Central Powers, were German immigrants, obviously, but also Irish immigrants because of their relationship with Great Britain. However, it should be known that native-born Americans at this time sided with the Allies because of their democratic ideals, and so that is where the majority is going to be. However, it's not a major majority, and it's going to take something to really get us going. The reasons for us to join. The first, although we did have a policy of neutrality, this did not stop the U.S. from trading with Germany, and Britain's blockade, though, stopped this from happening. It was really hard to get through to it, and so basically our trade and our loans were going to Great Britain only, not because we didn't want to trade with Germany, but because of Great Britain's naval superiority at the time, which led us to unrestricted submarine or untersea boat warfare. The Germans felt that it was their only way to win. They had Russia on the ropes with the Russian Revolution. They could focus their attention to the Western Front, and if they could get Great Britain to stop fighting, they would win by getting their people to stop, hopefully cutting off all supplies to them, and before the U.S. entered the war was their goal with this unrestricted submarine warfare. This did not work, and the last thing for the United States to enter the war was the Zimmerman telegram. This led to nationalist fever in the United States, and on April 6, 1917, the United States will declare war, minus a couple progressives and pacifists, including our Wisconsin senator at this time, Robert LaFayette. He will vote no for the war. Now, as we get into the war, obviously the war declared April 6, 1917. As we get into this war will be seen as America's and Woodrow Wilson's idea of keeping democracy alive. And we can see that with his 14 points during the Treaty of Versailles. That war shouldn't be taken lightly, that we should become a part of it only as a last option, and now it was our chance to help fight for the principles we believed in. With that, we get our first really total war. Obviously, there's only two. You could say the Civil War was a third, although it was a Civil War, but really World War I, World War II are going to be our two total wars, and we're going to see this in numerous ways. It is critical to know that at this time, that with Russia out due to the Russian Revolution, Germany was so close to winning. That by us getting our troops in barely enough time, we stop the ability of Germany to win this, and so it almost came true with the unrestricted submarine warfare that Germany had a chance. The first thing we need to talk about is mobilizing. With this, we get the idea of the Selective Service Act. This is of 1917. This is going to create a system of conscription or drafting in a democratic method, and it's going to start with all men from age 21 to 30 and later expand to ages 18 to 45. With that, we get General Pershing, who's going to form the American Expeditionary Force. Pershing was the same gentleman who went after Pancho Villa in Mexico. He takes two troops there. 49,000 will die. However, 112,000 will eventually in total die when you add in the Spanish flu, which we talked about, started. Our first case was found March 11th, 1918 in the United States. So much more was killed altogether. Now, how would we pay for this? Two things we'd pay for it. And we talked about these progressive amendments. Many of them were passed because of the war and necessity for them in certain ways. So understand the progressive movement. These amendments are kind of attached to it because there had been much work done, but many of them had been passed during our action in the war. We will get also bonds, just like we saw in World War II, and it will raise $33 billion. You'll get numerous federal agencies at this time, very similar to the ones in World War II. The War Industries Board set the production priorities and set production priorities and centralized control over raw materials and prices. The National War Labor Board will be ran by former President William Howard Taft, who's basically going to help arbitrate disputes between workers and labor. And so at this time, between the owners and the unions, and so at this time, labor is going to win many concessions. Wages are going to rise. We get an 8-hour workday more consistently, and because of this, union membership will increase. The last is the U.S. Food Administration, and this is where Herbert Hoover, our president right before the Great Depression or into the Great Depression, is going to make his claim to fame. Remember, he didn't run for election until he ran for president, and this is because of how efficient we were. Hoover's claim to fame was conserving food for the war effort, and he was able to do it. As he establishes this, food going to the Western Front rapidly increases. He becomes kind of a hero with this, and it will continue to help him at the end of the 1920s into the 1930s to become president. Now, propaganda was a huge thing during this time. You can see this would be for Herbert Hoover. Okay, food will win the war. You came here seeking freedom. You must now help preserve it. What is needed for the outlays waste nothing. These would all go along with that. This is one for the War Industry Board and those resources. The person in charge of this kind of propaganda was a gentleman named George Creel, who was a journalist. He's going to use this patriotic persuasion and then also kind of this legal intimidation to get his way. He's going to use artists and growing people from vaudevilles, the theater, movie industry to get his message across. Maybe more importantly is this connotation that we really need to make our enemy evil, and basically anything, and we've seen this later in society with freedom fries after France doesn't support us after 9/11, but everything German is evil. Hamburgers become liberty steaks. German beer becomes kind of taboo, and it brings about support for the 18th Amendment and prohibition during this time. But more importantly, we get something called the Espionage Act of 1917, and very similar to what John Adams did, but it was really trying to stop anyone who's kind of inciting rebellion or obstructing the draft or war effort. You could get up to 20 years in prison. The most famous case was Schneck versus U.S. in 1919. This was a gentleman who was passing out pamphlets against the draft. This went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled that free speech could be limited if there was clear and present danger to public safety. And this is critical to understand as we head into World War II with Japanese internment. This is also important to know that this act is still on the books, okay? And so people are still being charged under this today. The other act that's no longer around, this will be repealed in 1921, is the Sedition Act. Basically, you couldn't say anything that was disloyal or abusive to or criticizing to the government. There'll be about 2,000 people prosecuted. Only about half of those are convicted and jailed. The most famous would be our socialist Eugene Debs. He's going to be charged for 10 years and spend 10 years in prison according to this. Okay, this is Creel's work. Okay, making the enemy look as bad as possible, glorifying patriotism, getting people to buy Liberty bonds. And remember, Snowden is a great case of the Espionage Act still being used today. Also in the news currently is Chelsea Manning. Google it, Chelsea Manning. You can read all about it. But she was charged under this Espionage Act of 1917. On the home front, just like World War II, we get a huge front for those minorities because they're needed to work. Women will play a huge role in industry, and because of this, this allows for a huge push to give them voting rights and the passage of the 19th Amendment. African Americans will also play a big role. Maybe the key here is the Great Migration. It really started earlier in the 1910s, but it's going to be magnified with the need for people to work. So you see African Americans moving from the south to northern cities. One also could be one of the reasons we get the Harlem Renaissance later in the 1920s. However, this need for jobs and wanting to get away from the Jim Crow laws is really a big bonus for those to move out of the South. However, there is still segregation. World War I still saw that we had a segregated military, just as World War II won't happen until Truman, who will desegregate the military in the 1950s. W.E.B. Du Bois speaks about this, that we have these guys fighting, but yet not gaining any equality. And also, just like in World War II, you're going to get race riots breaking out. Mexican Americans also are going to play a huge role as they migrate to the Southwest, but also the Midwest too. And so you're going to get a large Mexican American move here, I should say Mexican move here, which is also going to bring our Latino population an increase in that. Now, at the end of the war, we need to talk about this really quickly, and we did. We get Armistice Day, November 11th, 1918, at the 11th hour. Firing stops. We get a peace, but we won't get the Treaty of Versailles until 1919. With our basically our big four: Great Britain, France, the United States, and Italy. Although Italy didn't have a big role in this, you're going to get some thoughts. And Wilson comes away just like why he entered the war with his 14 points. He wanted world peace. He wanted to be able to pick democracy, and he wanted a League of Nations to protect this and protect us from war. However, in the United States, there is huge opposition to this, including in Congress. Okay, both the House of Representatives and Senate had a Republican majority. Wilson doesn't care about this, and he's going to try to push for these 14 points in the Treaty of Versailles to get passed, although he knows it's not going to happen with that leadership. And so he really doesn't want to compromise, and probably needs to compromise to get it passed, and tries to go on this tour of the United States to get public support. He's almost on his deathbed to do it, but he doesn't get it done. You're going to have a group of individuals called the irreconcilable who are going to refuse to vote for it. You're also going to get these reservationists who will sign at the League of Nations, and Article 10 is amended. Article 10, there was questions about the U.S. sovereignty in that amendment, or in that article, and also that it would go against the Monroe Doctrine. And so it's not going to pass. And so we do not get peace with Germany through the Treaty of Versailles. It's going to have to be done in other methods. We are also not going to be part of the League of Nations. And so we are going after World War I back to a policy of isolationism and neutrality. One thing I do need to mention that happened right after the war because of the Russian Revolution is the Red Scare. Okay, and this is going to lead to the first Red Scare. We're going to see the second right after World War II. But it was just an easy move from anti-German perception to anti-communist or anti-Russian perception. And you're going to get something called the Palmer Raids at this time. Basically, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer is going to put J. Edgar Hoover in charge of this Bureau of Investigation. This Bureau of Investigation is going to look at anarchist, socialist, labor agitators, mostly foreign-born, and they're going to deport up to 500 individuals, but really looking and really trying to explain a series of bombings that had occurred. And so we're going after this. But maybe more importantly to this is going to put basically be J. Edgar Hoover's claim to fame, which will later help him found the FBI in the 1930s. He is going to be ahead of the FBI for a long time and make it what it is today with the foundation. But this would have never happened without this first Red Scare and the Palmer Raids. All right, folks, that's all I got for World War I. Enjoy your 3-day weekend. Look forward to seeing you again on Monday.